This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
Well, how great to have Dr. Tom Woods with us today. Tom is Senior Fellow at the Mises Institute. He earned his Bachelor's in History from Harvard University, his Master's, his MPhil, and his PhD in History from Columbia University. He's the author of 9 books. I haven't talked to him about this since yesterday, maybe more than 9. But the one that we're all really looking forward to, Tom, is your forthcoming one, which people can pre-order on Amazon, and that's Nullification. Now, this has to be one of the hot issues, not only in all of American history, but right now, too. So explain to us, why is this such a key issue?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm shocked that it's become a key issue. I mean, as shocked as I was to see the Fed become a key issue. The idea that in my lifetime, within 2 years of each other, these issues would be discussed by ordinary people would just have seemed absurd to all of us. But it seems to me that it's been a variety of factors sort of coming together at once. It's not only a sense of despair among people that they feel like they've tried everything against the federal government, they've played fair, they've written articles, they've given DVDs to their neighbors, they've tried to educate people, and yet the thing just keeps growing and growing and growing. So I think there's a sense that, just voting for another plastic man to send to D.C. might not do the trick. But I think a second factor that we can't discount here involves the Internet. Because I was on NPR about maybe a month or two ago against a very, very typical sort of law professor type, and he was suggesting that the reason people are talking nullification today, whereas they weren't talking about it in the 1990s, is that we had a white president then. Now we have a black one. I mean, it's not very subtle, the second grade level analysis we get from the law school professor types. And it seems to me that, no, the difference is that in these years, people can go to the Internet and learn about previously unheard of views. They can learn about nullification, the principles of 98, the real history of nullification, which has nothing whatsoever to do with slavery or anything of that sort. They can get unfiltered views now. They can learn about options like this, whereas in the 1990s, where were they going to find out about that? So that is just another example of how the floodgates have opened thanks to the...
And Tom, it's absolutely true that you and Ron with his book End the Fed, you with your book Meltdown, New York Times bestsellers, both of them, have turned on millions of Americans to an understanding of why the central bank is so dangerous. Whereas, I must say, I was trying this for decades and never had any luck. You two did it, and of course Ron's presidential campaign too. But here are these ideas that, as you indicated, were first written about by Thomas Jefferson and by James Madison in 1798 in the Virginia and the Kentucky Resolves, were used by South Carolina to oppose a federal tax increase in the 1830s against the slaveholding President Andrew Jackson, who used all the same arguments that Lincoln would later use.
Right.
But it's all back. So aren't the Tea Parties just waiting for your book? I mean, it seems to me like this book I think it's going to be your bestseller ever.
We'll see. I decided to do it in the middle of working on another book, which I put aside for a while because I said, now wait a minute, this topic is hot, and there needs to be a book for the general public that anybody can understand that's just filled with all the arguments you would need to, at the very least, make clear that you have a serious case here. And so I wanted to do this for that reason, and particularly because I saw there were Tea Party chapters that were posting my videos on nullification on their websites and blogs. So I thought, well, this is something. Now suddenly there's an audience out there that is ready to hear this, that is action-oriented, and I think it's actually quite interesting, as you had Michael Bolden on the podcast not long ago, and he gave an excellent Tea Party speech, by the way. It was very revealing because he's speaking to a very, very typical Tea Party group, basically decent Americans, but they haven't thought through everything very clearly necessarily. And he begins by rallying them, getting them excited about all the problems and what needs to be done. This is our opportunity to rise up and change things. And they're with him, and he starts asking things like, Well, should we sue them in their courts over these issues? And people are cheering, not quite following where he's going with this. He's saying, should we just try to vote them out? And of course they're cheering like crazy. And he's saying, all right, I guess people aren't quite following where I'm going with this. So then he introduces the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 1798. Complete silence. Now at a Ron Paul event or at one of our events, you mention that, you get a big cheer. None of them had even heard of these documents. Then he goes on and explains the idea of the states, when the federal government does something unconstitutional, resisting it. Well, then they're skeptical. By the end of the speech, they're cheering like crazy. And so I think, that, as you say, Lew, there is an audience out there that they might not even know about the subject yet, but when it's explained to them, they say, this makes sense. It's just common sense. You can't say the federal government gets to be the unilateral interpreter of its own powers. I mean, hello, this should be obvious. This should not be controversial. So yeah, they might not know about it now, but I'm hopeful that there will be certain media outlets that will be anxious to promote the idea, and the book is a vehicle to promote the idea.
You know, Lord Acton said that federalism was the great American contribution to political philosophy and to the cause of liberty. And, of course, nullification is one aspect of this. Federalism doesn't just mean what it means to the typical conservative these days.
Right, and, of course, it doesn't enforce itself. If there's no force to push back, then you shouldn't be surprised when the federal government just reigns supreme over everything. I think there is this very, very unfortunate view that a mere document can restrain the federal government. I don't think documents can restrain any of these institutions, but the one bit of insight that I think is particularly relevant here is to think of the framers of the Constitution as thinking in terms of ambition being poised against ambition. There are a lot of ambitious people in the state governments. They're not, and I don't mean that as a compliment, but if they realize that there is a constituency that will cheer them and support them, if they stand up to the federal government, well, then we normal people who just want freedom can sit back and watch the fireworks go off as the one battles against the other. That we need much, much more of.
Tom, aren't we seeing this all across the country? I mean, it's in the South, it's in the West, it's in the North. Nullification is a subject of interest in Vermont just as clearly as it is in California or Florida. Is there really a revolution happening?
Well, there could be if the idea begins to spread. It's still, I think, relatively little known, and it's sort of easy to demonize this idea. All the usual suspects will make all the usual idiotic claims about it. But as I say, there is an eager audience for this, and you're right. It's everywhere. It's not some kind of right-wing idea. In fact, if you look in American history, if you look at the various purposes to which nullification has been put in, for example, the 19th century, well, by and large, they actually are causes that you might historically associate with the left. I mean, they were nullification was used was first threatened against any military conscription bill that might be passed by the federal government. Then when the federal government did pass a bill for the enlistment of minors into the military, there were a couple states that said, no, I don't think so. So there was, so that you would typically think of as a left-wing movement. For free speech, of course, in 1798, against the Jeffersonian embargo, and against slavery. The abolitionists repeatedly referred to the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 as justification for resisting the unconstitutional aspects of the fugitive slave law, particularly of 1850. Now, that just goes to show there's no particular reason that this would be a left or right issue. It's simply, are you an imperial American or are you a regular American? I mean, do you want to dominate all power centers in society, or are you basically content to live your life like a regular human being?
You mentioned Michael Bolden before, but he points out that it was the drive to legalize medical marijuana that has been the key aspect of the whole nullification movement in so many states, in California and other states, where there has been actual nullification, at least to a large extent, of what the feds would like to outlaw.
Right, and I think I agree with him that that's an excellent example, because it goes to show what is possible when there is an enraged populace that will not allow certain injustices to occur, regardless of whether the injustice is being perpetrated by somebody who happens to be a federal employee. They're saying, no, we're not going to go along with it. Even if your federal court and your circuit court tell us we have to, we're simply not doing it. And now the Justice Department, I guess, is basically saying, well, we're not going to engage in these raids anymore on these medical marijuana facilities. And so sometimes when you raise this issue, people will say, well, the Justice Department isn't even going to enforce this anymore, so that's not a good example for your side. No, that is a great example. Why aren't they enforcing it? Because they know the level of resistance they're going to meet. And it's interesting to see that even in states that we might consider to be more socially conservative, like Kansas, we've seen medical marijuana initiatives introduced in which the bill in question expressly refers to the 10th Amendment as this being a matter of the health of their citizens. This is obviously not anything the states ever gave up to some federal bureaucrats. This is their issue to deal with. And so they're thinking of it precisely in terms of a federal issue, not just a civil liberties issue, but a federalism issue. So that's and now I guess there's some move in California to try to decriminalize marijuana more or less across the board. Well, what, pray tell, does that have to do with slavery? I mean, at some point, the law professors are going to have to admit this does not have anything whatsoever to do with slavery, and that probably the number of people in the year 2010 who secretly want to reintroduce slavery could balance on the head of a pin, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's time to look at the issue on its merits instead of demonizing things in the usual left-wing tradition. Instead, we should appeal to another left-wing tradition, the tradition of Kirkpatrick Sale, of William Appleman Williams, of decentralized, truly humane communities in which a centralized bureaucracy is not making decisions for every single community in the country, but instead you have different communities with different values in which lifestyles are different. There's a part of the right wing that hates that social vision, and there's a part of the left wing that hates that social vision. But the rest of the people are the regular Americans to whom I think nullification will have strong appeal.
Tom, I was thrilled the other day to see Christopher Hedges, who's one of the most interesting anti-war writers, and I highly recommend his book, War, a Force That Gives Us Meaning, had a great article on a left-wing site in favor of secession. So he was endorsing not just nullification, but secession as the great path to freedom, and he was very friendly to even the Tea Parties. So that's very interesting. Sort of outside of the commanding heights, we have people on the left and people on the right, quote unquote, in each cases, getting together and supporting these sorts of ideas.
I was very glad to see that Chris Hedges piece because it's also reasonable. Of course, the idea of secession is considered to be crackpot by people who take their cues as to what they're allowed to think, from Newsweek and Mort Zuckerman or John McLaughlin or somebody. But I don't. I just want to think things through on their merits according to the logic. And the Hedges piece was very, very refreshing to see. And also refreshing was that when Sean Wilentz wrote an article, Sean Wilentz, a professor of history at Princeton, wrote an article against nullification, I responded to him on your site in one of the pieces I'm the most proud of, which because I feel like I just slapped him all over the place. But what's interesting, though, is that after his piece came out, there was my response, but there was also a response from The Nation magazine gently debunking him, basically saying, well, look, I mean, the idea of decentralization, there's no particular reason this would favor the so-called right as opposed to the so-called left. They didn't make this point, but obviously Hitler didn't like states' rights at all. He favored a gigantic, unified German state. Naturally, what else do you think he would favor? But they specifically, in The Nation magazine, they pointed to the use by the abolitionists of this idea and said that the idea basically itself is morally neutral. It's what you do with it that matters. The idea of simply of resisting, well, it depends on what it is you're resisting. And given that the federal government, everything it does is morally outrageous, I'm pretty glad when anybody resists any part of it.
Tom, your book on nullification is going to be published at the end of June. But let's say people are interested in learning more about the subject right this minute. What do they look at?
Well, a few things. I want to first just mention something that's other than my own stuff, and that is Michael Bolden's 10thamendmentcenter.com. Don't be driven away by what sounds like a very conventional website named 10th Amendment Center. You think, oh, here we go, more feckless federalism activism. But no, these guys are really hardcore. They've got a wonderful legislative tracking page where they map out, literally on a map of the U.S., all the nullification initiatives all over the country. It's indispensable. 10thamendmentcenter.com. There's an interesting initiative starting up called WeRefuse.com, which I think is worth looking at. And I have some videos and a few articles here and there on my TomWoods.com site, but I think those are the main ones. And then, of course, on your site, I think you have basically been gleaning a lot of this and sifting out really the best of the articles. I mean, the absolutely indispensable pieces, I think, have consistently shown up on LewRockwell.com.
Well, Tom, I think we're entering an even more interesting period of American history. And I've predicted that your book is going to be the handbook of the Tea Parties, and I expect to see crowds waving it, massive crowds all waving it. And I think there's some great stuff ahead, despite what's the shenanigans in Washington. Great stuff happening at the actual grassroots. And thanks for all you do to educate these people and inspire them.
My pleasure, Lew. And I'll just add, just as a closing note, that the more hysterical the establishment, the Chris Matthews of the world seem about this idea, the better you know it has to be. But anyway, thanks again for having me.
Darn right. Upset Chris Matthews.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show. Produced by LewRockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast or on the website, email advertising@LewRockwell.com. And thanks for listening.